No, exactly. Some exposed to this time, I missed the fact that the children have been
That's what I imply. There's a printed version that
it's a caveat of right in the sense of, you know, therefore, well, that goes back to
it was 8 till the beginning of the 20th century.
Do you remember the transcripts?
1,100 samples, randomly selected people. So here was a gigantic sample. Those 5 forces, when they replied, indicated that they had seized about 8 million images in that 2-year period. Now, if you kind of did the statistical work on that, what that suggested was that within the same period, within England and Wales, not Scotland, Northern Ireland included, the number of images in circulation through in the United Kingdom of child abuse images, the number of images was in excess of, or likely to be in excess of, 350 million child abuse images. 8 million absolutely definite, because that's what they actually seized. The 350 million is a calculation, a statistical calculation based on extrapolating from that population area. And that's one country. That's the United Kingdom, right? Or rather, in fact, it's less than the whole of the United Kingdom. It's just England and Wales. Not long after we got this information, through that freedom of information process, the head of the British police unit that deals with online crimes against children, a man called Peter Davis, went on national television, and he said that the police had been monitoring the traffic in child pornographic images, in child abuse images within the United Kingdom, the technical tools that allow them to do this. I'm happy to explain how they do it if you want to. And they had identified between 50 and 60,000 individuals in the United Kingdom, and this is UK-wide, by the way, who had been trading in and dealing with child abuse images. Overwhelmingly, these images were, that I'm talking about were being traded over peer-to-peer networks and so on. So 50 to 60,000. Now, in no year since records began have the police in the United Kingdom ever arrested more than 2,000 people for child pornographic image-related offences. The average is probably around 15 to 1,600. So what that means is, even if the police were able to sustain a number of arrests at 2,000 per annum, which they couldn't do, by the way, that's just, I'll explain that later. But even if they could keep arresting people at the rate of 2,000 a year, it would be 2032 before the British police were able to arrest the last person that they already know about, or the resources. And by the way, that's not, let's just remember that we're not just talking about police capacity to go and arrest somebody, seize their computer, do all the analysis and so on. Then we've got to think about the courts and potentially also the prison system. We have 91,000 places in our prisons in England and Wales, and at the moment there's about 91,500 people in there. It's a bit overcrowded in a few places. So even if they could arrest them, the courts probably would collapse, trying to process them and deal with them, and there wouldn't be any places in prison to put them anyway. So now, wherever I've gone around the world, I do a lot of travelling around the world, police officers essentially say pretty much the same thing. The numbers are just too big. We cannot get out there and arrest them all, even if we, and we'd like to. They all want to, but they can't. So it seems to me, if we are going to have any hope at all of dealing with this trade, this enormous trade in images that is going on over the internet, the idea that we're going to be able to arrest our way out of it is simply a non-starter. We have to find new and better technical means of disrupting the trade. I mean, we can go on, I'm sure we will go on to speak about the importance of the images and why it's important to stop this traffic in them, but it seems to me any notion that we are going to persuade people to stop circulating these images over the internet because they're frightened of being arrested is a pipe dream.
Abuse material is no longer a feature on the internet. It's because it's just the way technology is. Technology evolves, criminals evolve, and they find new ways to do things. And we are playing essentially a game of catch-up here. And it's extremely difficult to be 100% on the winning side. So.
And again, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have to agree with the other panelists so far. I think knocking down doors, as emotionally satisfying as it would be, is just not going to solve the overall problem. The breadth of the problem is too large. You have to think of the internet as a representative soup of humanity. And whether we like it or not, these criminals are a percentage of humanity. Which means that we have to find other technical means of dealing with them. And whether that's technology like photo-DNA to help the interdiction of abuse images that have already been identified, or other technologies to identify video images in process, that starts to address some of the concerns. But as probably all of this panel knows, as the move to real-time abuse starts to it starts to become extremely difficult to use a signature-based method to actually track that type of abuse. And so we're going to have to develop new techniques, and that involves social change. So how do we balance the need for individual privacy with personal safety of a child? It becomes an extremely complex equation. And I'm not sure there is a right answer yet. I'm not sure we have the debate at enough level to actually have that answer yet. But I think it's one of the things we're going to have to tackle, not only as an industry, but governments and individuals as well. What are we comfortable in having in terms of introspection so that our children might be safe?
Yes, is that work? Yeah. Thanks, Mary-Laure, again for inviting us. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with the other panelists. I think we also need to point out, as I think has slightly been referred to, that child abuse is a societal issue, and the abuse of children on the internet is also a societal issue. So when we look at technological solutions, which is the reason we're here today, we also have to remember the environment in which these crimes are taking place. I think that's essential. In terms of InHope, I represent InHope, which is the International Association of Internet Hotlines, who focus on reporting and the removal of child sexual abuse material from the internet. Our shared vision is an internet free of child abuse material, but I think we have to be very realistic about the challenges of that, and we certainly, I would agree with the other panelists about the difficulties of saying that we can arrest our way out of this problem. We simply cannot. It comes back to a societal problem, and we need to find societal responses, combining technology, combining social responsibility, and combining public awareness about the problem.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you. I think it's working. Thank you. Before we maybe move on and discuss the challenges and of some technological solutions that are available, and that Ashton raised very valid points, and the other panelists, maybe we can discuss the positive use of some tools that are in the market, and maybe some of our participants to the workshop are not aware, they're not familiar with them. So it could be interesting maybe to describe a little bit, could you talk a little bit more about photo-DNA and how it works, and maybe, is that fine? Yes? Sure. And why, how it has been developed and how it works, and who is using it?
I can talk about some of that. Who's using it is a private matter. I can talk about the people who are in public. Can people hear me now? Yep. Cracking, thank you. So I can talk about some of that. I can't necessarily talk about every user of photo-DNA because that information is up to them to reveal. It's not up to us, but I can talk about the ones that are in the public domain. So photo-DNA is a technology that enables known child sexual abuse imagery to be tracked by means of a signature. Unlike previous signature mechanisms, which were really quite fragile, photo-DNA signatures can identify the same image that is presented in a variety of ways, in different formats, and even when the criminal intentionally changes an image. In the past, a single bit being changed would require a new signature, even if the image was unidentifiably different from the user's perspective. We developed the technology with Dartmouth College, and we donated it to NECMEC in 2009, and we make the code freely available to law enforcement and service providers alike. Software companies like NetClean include it in their products, and they also make that freely available to law enforcement. The technology works by essentially taking an image, converting it to a common format and common shape and style, and dividing it into a number of segments. The segments are then taken as a histogram in 4 directions, and that generates 128 unsigned characters, which is used to generate a signature. And then you take the non-Euclidean distance between 2 images to determine the similarity. So you take an image factor, and we use a number in our services online of slightly less than 40,000. That's an arbitrary number. It just provides a good experience in terms of low false positive rate and high probability of match. A number of people are using this in the public domain, including Google and Facebook. Would people like to know more?
Do you want to add anything about that, John? aware about photo-DNA?
I know. PhotoDNA has been around for a few years now, and it was a fantastic initiative by Microsoft to develop it. Even more fantastic that they gave. Whoops. It was on. Oh, okay, all right. So it was PhotoDNA has been around for a few years now, and it was a fantastic initiative by Microsoft to develop it in the first place. They were under no obligation to do it. They chose to do it as a part of their kind of corporate social responsibility initiative, and it was even more fantastic that they then gave it away. I can say this, by the way, he can't. He works for Microsoft, I don't, okay? Google, I mean, Marco Pancini will be here soon. Google have developed a similar tool now for video ID that does a similar function, but I won't speak about that because Marco won't have anything to say if I do. My view, actually, in the UK we're going to be pushing this line. We have a general election coming up soon, so it's a good moment to push out new policies. My view is that any internet service provider, any company that is providing public access to the public, whether free or paid for, to online services, should be under a legal obligation. They're certainly under a moral obligation, but they should be under a legal obligation to use the available technology to try to ensure that their networks, the services that they're providing, as I say, free or paid for, are not being abused or misused to assist the distribution of child abuse images. Know that, why wouldn't you use whatever tools are available to try to stop it? Well, in England, in the UK, that's a view that we are going to be pushing forward. We're not going to say you must use Microsoft PhotoDNA. We're not going to say you must use Google ID or whatever in the end they choose to call it. But we are going to say you should be doing something. You are in a business that's about the abuse of children. You don't want to be, but you are. And if you are, then you should act to deal with it.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just going, if we go back to the point about, we're talking about positive uses of technology, and I would absolutely agree, the developments such as PhotoDNA, such as the various sort of video fingerprinting technologies currently in development and that have been developed as a response to volume, as a response to the increasing amount of videos being seen, being shared. These are all really positive developments, and they've really influenced change in terms of what law enforcement can do, in terms of what internet hotlines are able to do as well. But I think one thing to point out, certainly from the hotline perspective, is that using these technologies to disrupt access to known materials on the networks is also based upon us knowing that the material is illegal and it being assessed as illegal in the relevant jurisdiction. So we've also got to look at focusing on feeding into the systems, reporting how are we detecting the material, and that's something that obviously the internet hotlines play a major role in. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit later about some of the projects that we're involved in to try and sort of bring together to move that debate forward. Perhaps we talk about that at a later stage. But I think it's important to say, yes, the technologies are very positive and are being used and can be applied in many, many different ways. But we mustn't become complacent about we've got the technology, therefore we've solved the problem. It's a continuing problem, and we need to feed in to the technology and help it develop as much as it helps us sort of reduce access to these materials.
Thank you, Amy. I have another question related to PhotoDNA. As I think one of you mentioned, it's meant to be dealing with fixed images. So my understanding is that law enforcement is reporting that they are finding more and more videos among the collections. So is there any solutions? Are they, you're aware if Microsoft is working on some kind of solution that would be able to apply a similar, product for videos? I'm sorry, Marco is not here, so when he comes here, I'll ask him on behalf of Google.
Live. So I'm not aware that we're working on a video solution at this point in time. I think one of the opportunities for industry in this area is to actually collaborate and work on areas of strength. If we come up with a good answer for static images and somebody else comes up with a good answer for moving images, I think that should be embraced. Why would you want to reinvent the wheel? Especially when what we're looking for is the ability to have common signatures that we can apply across multiple platforms in multiple jurisdictions. I think that starts to become a driving factor as well as we move forward, providing the technology works out in the way you hope it does.
John, please.
It might be just worth reminding ourselves why the images matter, because, and I say this because, you know, in Europe a few years ago there was a big fight, basically, between us and the free speech lobby, when the European Union, hi Marco, we've been talking about you. There was a big fight in the European Union a couple of years ago. The Commission proposed a new law to make it compulsory for every state that was in membership of the European Union to make provision for the removal of any websites, any URLs containing child abuse images. And a whole set of people jumped in and said, that's completely wrong, you shouldn't do that, and they won. The Commission dropped that proposal. What the Commission did do, which was still a good thing, was say that it's an option for every member state. So in other words, they said it's perfectly legal to have mechanisms for removing URLs of websites known to contain child abuse images, but it wasn't compulsory. Now, the people who argued against making it compulsory, and we supported it being compulsory, by the way, they said, no, what you've got to, it's not you shouldn't be bothered about taking down, well, they didn't say you shouldn't be bothered, but they said the issue of taking down the URL is not the important thing. The important thing is to get the image deleted at source, okay? So it might be in the top of the server might be on the top of Mount Everest, or in outer Mongolia, or in some country with very few police officers who knew anything about this. That's, as far as they're concerned, the important thing is not to block it, but it's to get it taken down. And of course, that's what we would all prefer. Everybody would prefer that the images were removed at source so that they were never available to anybody, anywhere, ever. But that's not the way it works. I mean, Susie Hargreaves is here from the Internet Watch Foundation. I'm sure Susie will be speaking at some point about how quickly the system can be made to work to get images taken down. But I'm sure Susie will also mention some instances where it's proving exceptionally difficult to get some of these images taken down. So the question then becomes, why are the images themselves so important? Why is blocking or restricting access to these images important? And I'll very quickly just say why. First of all, there's the rights of the child in the image. A child doesn't consent to being, and bear in mind, what is it, 60-odd, 70-odd% of these pictures are showing children aged 10 or under being raped by an adult. Some percentage are showing 2-year-olds being sexually abused. These children have never consented to being raped or sexually abused, and they've certainly not consented to pictures of it being published or distributed on the image. And every time that image is republished, in a way they're being re-abused. And who knows who might see an image with a child in it and what they might do with it. There are all kinds of reasons why the image itself is important and why the images themselves are not accessible over the internet. That's why blocking and notice and take down is so vitally important in my view. But secondly, crucially, it's a vital evidential tool, of course, for the police or social agencies to try and track the child and get the child the help that it so obviously needs, because a child that appears in the child abuse image is obviously in some kind of desperate state in the first place and needs help and assistance. That's the second reason. The third is this. Why is it important to get these images removed as quickly as possible? Because there is evidence, of course, that they help and sustain paedophile networks. People who perhaps never never previously been engaged with these images come across them and find them, and it takes them on a path that in the end leads to more children being abused. So there's a third reason why dealing with the images in and of itself is a very, very important task, and getting them off the internet as quickly as possible, or restricting or blocking access to them as possible. And the fourth and final reason, of course, for as long as we keep reading stories in the newspapers about child abuse images being available and being downloaded and so on, it's kind of sending out a big signal to criminals of every kind that the internet is an okay place to do because if they can't deal with child abuse images on the internet, which probably even the majority of criminals don't like, if they can't deal with that, then of course it must mean that it's possible to get away with many other different types of crime on the internet as well. So there's that fourth additional reason why I think it's incredibly important. Things like photo DNA and Google's video ID or whatever they're going to call it, Marco will tell us in a minute, no doubt, that these things work and get the images or restrict access to the images as rapidly as possible.
No, absolutely. I mean, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, about, you know, there are many debates surrounding should we block, should we remove. I mean, In Hope as a network promotes the removal at source of illegal content, child sexual abuse material on the internet. However, there is, as John mentioned, within European countries, there are countries who also block access, there are countries who don't. One of the interesting things to look at when we talk about, just to go back to your original question, I think, about what technologies are there available. One of the things that the In-Home Network is currently piloting, and it's a joint law enforcement project, is actually looking at combining analysis of URLs and moving towards assessment of content on the internet, actually feeding into law enforcement systems, because it's important to remember the processes, as John mentioned, of bringing together what law enforcement are trying to achieve, what industry are trying to achieve through investing in technologies and providing access to them, and what civil society and internet hotlines, etc., are trying to achieve. So we're working on a joint project now, which is a pilot project in the EU, and we're hoping to roll it out, and that includes video fingerprinting technologies. So it's actually allowing our hotlines now to be applying image hashing technologies to the assessments that they're making, and also video hashing technologies, and to contribute ultimately to law enforcement databases that can then be used to investigate and identify children, as John says. And this is the thing that we must remember, we must come back to every time we mention technology. I mean, we can talk about technology for as long as we want, but ultimately what we're talking about is protecting real victims of sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. And this is really, really important. And I believe if we keep coming back to this point, we can actually reach consensus on where we can move forward.
Thank you, Amy. I think now it's time to introduce Marco Panzini from Google, who just joined us. Marco is Senior Policy Counsel for Google. And Marco, when you walked in, we were discussing the benefit of photo DNA, a bit of a background information about it, Stuart was providing us. And I also asked, you know, I'm aware that Google is using it, and also we were discussing the fact that there are more and more videos in the collections of you know, child exploiters. So is Google working on some kind of solution to deal with the videos that, you know, eventually are in the network?
So thanks again for the invitation. Apologize for the delay. For who doesn't know me, I'm Marco Pancini from the Google Brussels policy team. I'm dealing with media policy issues and child safety in some of the fora where we have the pleasure to interact together. I think the real focus for us in this moment is try to understand what technology can do in order to improve the hard work of detecting child abuse material online. For a few years, we were experimenting our own technology, very similar to photo DNA, which is actually interoperable with the photo DNA. And we decided to go public about that when we were sure that it was exactly what we were trying to achieve in terms of as a technological solution. Some of the results of using this tool are actually public. There was the news of a few weeks ago of the fact that thanks to this algorithmic match of images from the database in NICMEC possession and images that are floating on the network, we were able to detect a repeated offender. Actually, I would like to open bracket here and saying that actually the way the news was reported in the media and discussed in the public debate was absolutely the other way around. So without looking into the news, because actually this guy was a repeated offender, was somebody that was already under investigation, so was not caught because of the match of the image and the picture that was in his inbox. But the real question that everybody started to say, oh, what about if somebody sent it to me without my consent, and a picture that can match with the database of the child abuse material, without looking at the whole broader context where it was clear that we were supporting an ongoing investigation, that the information was handled to NICMEC in a way which is totally in line with the rule of law and so on. So say that I think technology can do a lot in order to help. I'm sure that we are looking also into videos. Still, I think we are not ready yet. I think there is also some problem in getting database of videos available that we can use as a match, because we have already a technology that is called PhotoDNA. PhotoDNA. Video. PhotoDNA is always content ID, and is applicable, is used on YouTube to fight against counterfeiting, fight against piracy. But again, here we can rely on a database of videos that are provided by right owners. Here we need to really build the inventory, and then I'm sure that technology will be able to find solutions. So again, the opportunities that technology and also big data, because if you look at PhotoDNA and our system of photo detection is based on big data, because it's an algorithmic match. You don't scan the whole video, you just need a few frames of the video, and actually contextual content on the video allows to create the match and then automatically raise the red flag and therefore create the alert. So again, the use of data-driven innovation and big data also on the field of the detection of child abuse material in the coming years will represent a very important strategy. Now, the need to find a balance and to stick with the rule of law, make sure that we have a process in place, make sure that there are not abuses is also very important, because any kind of issues that can raise in the enforcement of these policies could really lead to debate that can undermine our efforts in order to make internet a better place. So for now, I think we are doing the right thing. I think there are very strong, and all the actors in Open is a great example, but also NICMEC and all the actors involved in these very important activities are super serious, but transparency and accountability is something that we need to put as a priority for us.
No.
This is very interesting. Personally, I mean, speaking of new trends, there is something that is worrying me a lot. Is maybe you heard about it, the live streaming cases that are taking place in some countries. Basically, there are live shows of children, sex shows of children. It's happening in some Asian countries, specifically the Philippines and other countries. So what the abusers are doing is that they basically paying, and they, it's made to order a show. They're paying, they're staying in their own home country, and they're watching it through, some channels. So I'm very worried about how, we can deal with this, and the kind of technological solution we could use to sort of be able to track down this form of exploitation, and if there are, if it's possible to do it, and the kind of challenges that would appear if we were trying to do it. I don't know.
Thank you. So it's a very worrying trend, and you're quite right to call it out. It's becoming a more, I hesitate to use the word popular, but form of abuse. Part of the challenge is that traditional methods that we have to identify material based upon a signature, be that a video or a static image, rely on us having an original copy of that image. So there's nothing that we can, because it's net new material, we've got nothing to compare it to at a signature level. There's also an interesting challenge between the, and it's I mentioned it earlier, the balance between people desiring a right to privacy on the internet. And a lot of the technologies that are used for chat and video sharing or video streaming actually protect the channel of communication, so that you actually have to be on the inside of the channel to actually have some introspection to actually see the content. Then you have to look at the scale. I mean, there are billions and billions of minutes of video communication that is entirely legitimate, formed months and years. So whatever solution and approach has to sit on the inside of the secure channel, because that's what needs to be done. And secondly, it needs to somehow arbitrarily identify, or are we going to turn around and say, let's have a whole bunch of people in a room looking over our shoulder at every video? I'm pretty sure that's not the answer everybody wants. So what is the balance? I have to say, I don't think there is a really good answer today. And it's worrying, it's concerning. One option, obviously, is to start looking at following the money train, because this is a paid-for service. Unlike a lot of child abuse imagery, this is something, there's money changing hands for this capability. And an option there would be to actually follow the digital money chain back to the originator and the purchaser and the receiver. Obviously, that relies on intelligence that the police forces may or may not have into the ongoing abuse. Obviously, that speaks of live streaming of events between offenders, but there's also live streaming of activity between victim and offender, because there's also a trend to move very quickly from contacting children in social media to moving to compromise the child in live stream and getting to use using compromised images to force the child to perform further acts of abuse. And again, that's another act of live abuse that we have to be cognizant of, is becoming more and more popular. Both worrying trends, both very difficult problems to solve.
We're talking here about something called sextortion, I believe.
Yeah, indeed.
That's the term that is being used. Marco, John, or Amy, or Pretam, do you want to add anything about that?
No, I'd said to say I agree that there isn't yet an obvious solution for how we deal with video streaming, live video streaming. It's not obvious how that, I mean, I think isn't all of the traffic also encrypted anyway over Skype? So, that's the point Stuart was making about having to be somehow inside the stream, because you won't be able to spot it from outside. And the video ID and photo DNA only work because they're dealing with an image that's already been looked at and analysed, and they have a signature from it. And by definition, if it's live streaming, that can't possibly be the case. I mean, I know that the general heading for this was that we have to look to technology for better solutions for dealing with this problem, and we do for a good part of it. But there are some bits where technology may well not be able to provide answers, and this may be one of them. I know that the cops in Britain, I mean, we arrested 180 people, by the way, in the United Kingdom for being involved in live streaming cases arising from the Dutch Sweetie, the thing where they put up the false page and so on. They got intelligence out of that operation, which led in the end to 180 arrests. So I know that the cops in the UK, one of the things they've been thinking about is simply putting more police officers from the UK out into these countries where they suspect this type of activity is taking place. And since a lot of it is happening in the rich West and the rich North and so on, maybe that one of the responses that we're going to have to get for dealing with this is simply greater engagement by foreign police services working with the police in the Philippines and these other poorer countries to try to make sure that intelligence and information about this type of thing, because the people in some of the villages where this has been taking place, everybody knew what was going on, but the local cops, the local police were so overstretched or so not bothered or whatever the explanation was that they didn't pick it up and weren't able to act on it. But our cops can, if we go out there as part of a wider workforce or something.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with that, and I think, I would echo both points. I think looking at the money trails is a really important way to address this issue, because it is an exchange, it's a commercial exchange. Of course, then you have elements of how are they paying, because obviously a lot of the payments are not using traditional payment methods, and we have the issues about investigating virtual currencies, and there are a lot of associated issues with payment, but we've seen great success in financial coalitions within Europe, the European Financial Coalition, the North American Financial Coalition, and huge efforts, for example, to establish an Asia-Pacific financial coalition. So there are huge efforts to engage the finance industries to actually contribute to the disruption of the organized commercial payment for sexual exploitation of children online. But I think also, and to go back to it, I think it's important to look at law enforcement capacity, both within the region, both the origin countries of offenders, traveling sex offenders, or those offending online, children abroad, but also looking at local law enforcement capacity. This is an area that's hugely under-resourced, and it's a challenge when dealing with crimes committed across borders. But I also, and it's something that's spoken about a lot, but you hear it in every forum, regardless of whether you're talking about technology, law enforcement, it's this area, it comes back again to education and prevention, and actually trying to disrupt the supply within communities. And that's exactly, going back to John's point, certainly with some of the live streaming we saw, it was happening in concentrated areas and villages. Everyone knew it was happening, and there was a lower level of understanding that this was harmful to a child, because a lot of the adults in the community would say, well, it's only over the internet, there's no physical contact, so the child can't be harmed. So it's about also raising awareness about the dangers to children, as much as looking at ways to disrupt the network and to go after the offenders in the countries of origin. So it's a very complex issue, and yes, we don't have answers to it, and we can't just, as we've heard, applying technological solutions is challenging at the moment because of the nature of the activity. This is in the context of needing to deal with the problem again as a societal problem, and actually working with the communities to prevent the supply of children for these activities.
Thank you. So what I hear here is that technological solutions are parts of the solution, but in some very specific cases and specific forms of sexual exploitation, we have also to think of other ways of tracking that down the bad guys and sort of complement different type of solutions. That would be the case for live streaming. So speaking of money and financial coalitions, and it triggered a question I had about the cost of actually developing technological solutions, and I wanted to ask the participants about that, and because we all know that it's very costly to develop databases, applications, softwares, and so who do you think should be paying for its developments, and when it's available, how what type of business model we could use so that law enforcement agencies, civil society, NGOs, for example, operating a hotline could bear with the cost of licensing? So I don't know, Marco.
No, first one word on what we discussed before. So we really believe that follow the money is an effective way to going after criminal organizations exploiting child abuse material online. We are a member of the European Financial Coalition. Probably there should be ways to give to the European Financial Coalition, to Europol, more tools in order to fight against any kind of misuse of e-money services or financial services to get revenues from this traffic, including also, for example, the whole area of human trafficking, which is another important area to take in consideration. So, say that we should all focus on follow the money and try to make it work, again, under the rule of law, but in a way that is effective and is empowering law enforcement and prosecutors with tools and remedies. On the cost I can talk about my company and our policies. For sure, when we develop this kind of tools, usually we give them for free because we believe that our main goal is not make a business out of it, but is to increase trust online and make internet a better place. So, and again, that's because of the nature of the service that we provide. So we don't believe that there should be a business model behind that, but this is because of the specific nature of the service that we provide. If there are companies that they believe in making a business out of it, I think it's totally licit. And at the same time, we should really think to make sure that the cost of these tools and the way these tools are developed is inclusive and is open to all the law enforcement, especially as John said, there are law enforcement in the world that have different priorities, different means, and so collaboration, the Commission has done a lot of steps in this direction, between law enforcement globally is very important.
I agree. I think that the production of these tools should be where they're possible to be freely available to all. Certainly, that's our view on PhotoDNA. We make it freely available to both service providers and law enforcement. I think there's a broader question about some of the infrastructure that you need to support it. So, for example, how do we get the database of illegal images signatures in the first place? Is that a service provider responsibility, or is that a government responsibility, or does that lie between the two organizations in question? And I think the answer is probably somewhere between the two. But functionally, we can't go and have a database of illegal images. We can have a database of signatures, because we're a commercial organization, and we can't commit the crime of holding those images. So there's an aspect that needs to be performed by government, there's an aspect that needs to be performed by industry, and perhaps there's an aspect that needs to be performed by us as consumers as well. So there are costs, it's just a question of where they actually lie.
Well, I agree it's a shared responsibility. You can't have private companies holding big databases of illegal images. But I think it's all working on hashes. Sorry, I don't think
there's no issue about companies holding hashes, as long as those hashes can't be translated back into actual images. But somebody somewhere needs to guarantee that that's the way the system's working, and guaranteeing that they are hashes of the correct images. Otherwise, we only need one or two mistakes, for a legal image or an image of somebody's holiday snaps on the beach or something ending up in one of these databases, and it will discredit everybody's efforts in this field. So it's really, really important that these images that go into the databases, that create the hashes and so on, are looked at by experts, which is what happens in the United Kingdom. The IWF does it, and they'll take, along with the police, to make sure that we're only dealing with genuine illegal child abuse images, because a lot of people think it's all about secret censorship anyway. It's not, but we must never ever ever make mistakes which allow that idea to get any currency.
And certainly, in the 51 international internet hotline members of InHope, the vast majority are also making these assessments based against their national jurisdiction, which is important to remember as well, because internet hotlines and law enforcement in countries are governed by their national jurisdiction, which will define how they define an image, the level that is illegal and not illegal, and so there's a huge diversity. And when we talk about global hash sets, one of the things that there's been consensus on for a number of years is when we talk about different levels of illegal content and illegal child abuse material, the thing to focus on, and that could be shared globally, are baseline lists. These are lists of content, child sexual abuse material that will be illegal in all jurisdictions around the world that have legislation on the issue. And I think touching upon, yes, there are hash lists available, but I think possibly there's space for separate hash lists being stored and developed by organizations around the world to be shared, and for us actually to move towards a truly global list of known content. I think that's something that perhaps needs to be looked at in the future. But that doesn't answer your question about cost and who should be paying for it. I don't want to be the first person to use the multi-stakeholder word in the room. I think John may have already mentioned it. But I think it is an important thing to talk about. I don't think it's the responsibility of any one sector. I think industry has already done a huge amount. Certainly in the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen a sea change in what's been happening and the investments made. But I think everyone needs to be doing more. Governments need to be doing more. But we're moving in the right direction. There's no doubt about it. And the fact that we're having a panel like this today, I think, is just evidence of that.
Thank you. Just wanted to add to the discussion on the cost model and who should pay. As a UN agency, we clearly see this as a public-private partnership for the greater good. It's very obvious to us. And what we should probably be talking about is building more platforms for sharing such tools. We are very thankful to Microsoft, to Google for sharing this, giving it to the world. And we need platforms where these can be shared by, picked up by any member state who wants to use this. Probably for open source developers to come in and develop their own solutions, extend these solutions. So that probably should be one of the key focuses of our discussion. So.
Thank you. Before opening the floor for questions, I would like to ask two last questions myself. The first one would be, we're aware that Google and Microsoft, they have both made changes to the way their search engines work in relation to child abuse materials. So we'll be curious to hear about how is this going to work in terms of other languages, with other languages other than English? If you could tell us a little bit about that.
So we started with the English, and so the basic principle here, and that also talks about the whole discussion around search neutrality and so on. What we want to provide to the user on search is the best possible experience, which means that we don't want absolutely that the worst of the content that is available online is displayed. Therefore, we took in consideration clear sign in order to demote website where we know that the content hosted is bad. And that's one, together with other sign that compose the algorithm which make possible when somebody is putting a keyword on our search to get a result and therefore to access to content. So we are taking consideration this design to demote content that is not in line with our policies and is in some cases is absolutely not acceptable. For some specific content, we give no result at all. So we blocked for access to specific keywords that are given to us from law enforcement that give access to the worst of the worst. So that's to complete the information. And again, that the goal here is to really provide a great experience to the user. We are scaling up also to other languages, so the same approach will be also available to other languages. We don't know exactly the time frame, but this is something that is happening in these months and is ongoing.
I had a very similar position from ourselves, my colleague here. So again, we look for specific single-use, single-intent search terms, and in our case, we also return a public service announcement to the users, use those terms, directing them towards a charity for help. And again, we don't have timescales for rolling that out in multiple languages that I'm aware of at this point in time. But work is in progress.
Thank you. One last question to wrap up this section before we open the floor is looking a little bit at the future and all the technological changes that we can foresee, you know, like IPv6, the expansion of the domain name system, use of virtual currency. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you think this is going to impact child abuse materials and how they are being produced and used? Personally, I'm very worried about the impact of IPv6 and the availability of new domain name extensions. I don't know if either of you has any thoughts on that. You don't? John?
I have thoughts about almost everything. Obviously, the landscape is getting more complicated, and therefore, in principle, you would expect it would be easier for bad guys to do more bad things, particularly as we all know that every law enforcement agency in the world is already up to here and beyond with stuff that they're trying to deal with now. So any new development, it's always been this way. I mean, since time immemorial, criminals have been amongst the first to find and exploit new technologies for doing bad stuff. You know, we didn't invent the motor car, did we, to denude the planet Earth of carbon-based fuels and poison us all and end the human race through greenhouse gases. It's what we discovered later on. So I'm guessing that as these new technologies come out, the bad guys will be amongst the first to work out what to do about them, and we're all going to have to find out a way to get ahead of them, or at least keep up with them. But I agree, the Internet of Things, these gigantic databases of personal data that are existing around the place, they all offer huge opportunities for bad stuff. They also offer huge opportunities for good stuff, and I am optimistic fundamentally about the determination of the multi-stakeholder environment to solve these problems.
So I'm not particularly worried about IPv6 per se. I think that there, as I alluded to earlier, there is a tension between technologies that will enable people to have both privacy and anonymous behavior on the internet, and the ability for both technology service providers and law enforcement to be able to track people who are using child abuse material, or consuming it, distributing it. The very nature of absolutely private internet is almost incompatible with the ability to enforce laws and say with certainty that such and such a person on such and such a date committed such and such an offence. And so there needs to be that balance. But that's one we've always had. And we solve that problem with laws and processes and turn around and say, this is what we as a society are prepared to live with in order for our children to be safe, in order for our people to be safe. And it is that balance, but we haven't had the debate. And we keep on, as a society, I stress, shying away from it. We need to engage on that debate, actually have it, and deal with societal issues that the technology is going to provide.
This is actually a very nice way of wrapping up. You talking to Stuart?
Oh, sorry.
This is actually a very nice way of summarizing some of the challenges of the topic we're dealing with today. And I think at this stage, it's a good moment to open the floor for questions, because I'm sure that the issues that Stuart had just raised might trigger a lot of questions from the floor, and other issues that we also mentioned. So please feel free to ask questions if you have any or a need. Okay, so do we have someone who can take care of the mic and
Good background noise.
Yes, there is a lot of background noise, so it's a bit disturbing.
Thank you. My name is Jutta Kroll. I'm representing the German Center for Child Protection on the Internet. And I wanted to pick up on that question that more and more pictures are arising and that we need somehow to use the technical tools to dry out the mirrors. And when I have been reading the last report from the European Financial Coalition, I've seen that they stated that there is a decrease in the financial transactions they discover, but that doesn't mean that there is a decrease in the trade of the images, because there is a virtual currency, so other ways of payment that need to be addressed. So, because I think the financial transactions are one means to stop it. And on the other hand, we also face that the images themselves have become a currency. In some forums of pedophiles, it's just like you need to have an entrance fee. And if you can provide a new collection of images, you get access to the other collections that are already there. So that means this entrance fee is a reason why there is new abuse and new images are produced just to get access to the other images. And I think that's just not acceptable, and we need some more instruments to dry out the mirrors. Thank you.
Jonathan? Does anyone want to react to what you just said? Or just... Okay, Jonathan, you can.
Thank you so much. I'm Jonathan Sembajwe from Uganda, Rights of Young Foundation. I was supported by .Kids Foundation. My question goes to John. You have talked about some good work you are doing in bringing down, in fighting against materials, child abuse materials. I'm wondering, have you done some attempts of raising awareness to children to report cases of those who try to engage them in producing child rights abuse materials? Have you tried to empower these children because they are affected most? Have you done it so far? Thank you so much.
I work for and represent, within the United Kingdom at any rate, children's organisations whose entire work really is about doing what you've just said. Child sex abuse is not only bad for the child, it's a serious crime, and finding ways to reach out to the abused children, getting them to come forward, is an exceptionally challenging thing to do. Most children never report the abuse that they suffer. And when you do find reports of abuse, it's usually when they're adults. And that's why in the United Kingdom, at the moment, for example, there's been a lot of what we call historic abuse cases. And one of the reasons for that is children don't tell. Often their abuser is a relative, a family member. They are persuaded by the abuser that if they tell what's happened, that means the family will be broken up and destroyed, dad will go to jail, it'll all be terrible. So child sex abusers are very, very clever people very often. That's the reason children like them. They con them, they manipulate them into being silent. So your question is a fantastic question. It's in a way at the root of all of the work that the organisations I work with do, but it is exceptionally difficult to achieve.
I believe the gentleman over there is before you, and then at the back, and then Susie.
Patrick Curry, and I am from an alliance for the sharing of cyber information internationally. And I have a question which I will arrive at in a minute. What we find across the board is that identity fraud and the inability to be able to get accountability, not just for people, but for organizations and devices, provides the anonymity that fuels all sorts of criminal activity. So, for example, in the what we call the Okta report from EC3, ID fraud is named as the top enabler for all aspects of crime across Europe. The point here is we're now seeing an array of measures coming in to start to reduce anonymity and to introduce partial anonymity where it's required for a whole range of requirements. But we recognize completely a lot of the social challenges, in this case, that John has identified, and I understand that that's not just the answer. But my question is, to what extent, if we can start to reduce anonymity in every aspect of the transactions that occur, and I'm now talking about user, I'm talking about location, I'm talking about cross-border traffic, I'm talking about ISPs, I'm talking about devices. If we can start to introduce more authentication into those processes, would that be seen as a good thing from your point of view?
Not only is it a good thing, in my view, in the end, it's inevitable, because I don't think the current regime that we have across the world is sustainable. Unfortunately, I think it will probably take some gigantic catastrophe to trigger action by enough governments. And by the way, let's be clear what we're talking about here. If I want to log on to an internet service at the weekend using my weekend name of Maureen, by the way, that's a joke, that's up to me. That's nobody else's business. What matters is not knowing how I log in, whether it's Maureen or Arnold Schwarzenegger, or I can't remember which one I'm using at the moment. It's, am I traceable? Rapidly traceable, okay? Because if I knew for sure that my identity could be rapidly traced, then it would have a profound influence on how I behaved. People behave badly if they think they can get away with it, or more people behave more badly. I mean, St. Francis of Assisi, maybe if he was alive today and online, maybe he would always be virtuous and there would never be an issue with him. But in general, most people do bad stuff because they think they won't get caught and they can get away with it. So it's not what they present themselves as being, it's not how they log in to different places that I'm concerned about. It's if they do something bad or wrong, can they be traced? I think of we're going to end up with the cyber equivalent of a car registration number. When I drive down the road in my vehicle, I know very well that if I do something bad or stupid, my registration number is there and I can be apprehended, I can be brought to account. It doesn't mean anybody walking along the street or seeing me or my car knows who I am. But what I do know is that I can be traced if I have to be. If I go through a red light or I hit a pedestrian, my registration number gives me away. And I think we're going to end up with something, and we should end up with something like that on the internet. Now, people talk about countries where there are no free speech rights and no democratic rights. Well, you know, I'm deeply sympathetic, of course, to that. But you can't, you know, I don't think we're going to solve those problems simply by everybody else allowing criminals to carry on doing bad stuff. Issues of free speech and fundamental human rights are political problems within the jurisdictions and countries where they exist. And by and large, those problems exist in countries that have always had those problems. And the rest of the world shouldn't have to pay the price of that. So that's a big yes.
Well, so speaking into the mic for the gentleman back there. So, Patrick, you make an excellent point. Having some verifiable form of identity traceability, as John put it, I think is probably going to be an important factor moving forward. But then again, if you look at some of the technologies that are being used by criminals, their original intent was deliberately to provide the anonymity that we are now seeking to avoid. Will other technologies come out to improve the anonymity given a verifiable identity? I think they will. And that's because the nature of this game is move and counter move. We are playing an arms race, if you will, with the criminals. But I think having a traceable identity is probably a good thing for the majority of normal users on the internet who have nothing to fear and nothing to hide. Like Maureen, or Arnold, as he...
Thank you. The gentleman at the back, please.
My name is Muhammad Mustafa from Disk Foundation. Let me start where you stopped there. traceable identity. You know, the bulletproof hosting and FlexFax hosting, these are the hostings now allowing the criminals to have the content, illegal content hosted without tracing, basically. You know, within a few minutes, you can change the IP addresses. These contents are hosted either in a compromised computers or in a personal computers, and they are in a control of the DNS servers. So this is highlighting a new challenges for combating child abuse materials online. One more thing I want to ask you. I mean, there's two different questions basically. The second one, I'm coming from India. We had a couple of issues recently as far as the sextortion is concerned. It's a typical blackmail is like, I take some images from the children, probably innocent children's images, and I say that I have your nude images. If you don't act upon what I am saying, I will publish on the internet. That's a typical old blackmailing. We have new issue. They are taking the images, they are already publishing the images in a couple of websites and sending the URL to the victim and say, I have your images already published on the internet and this is the username and password. If you don't do what I said, I don't need to do anything. Automatically your image will be broadcasted to the internet. So this is a new threats coming out. So what are we trying to do? How do we address this kind of issues? I mean, anything thought about it? Thank you very much.
Just to address that issue, I think, sort of probably my response would be that this is not really an ICT issue. This is a human relational issue, because sextortion is a big and I could say growing problem. I think it's a problem that has been around for a long time. People abuse each other and extort each other, and now the use of ICT is increasing, and children are being targeted. There have been some high-profile cases in the UK, and there have been, unfortunately, I think 1 or 2 suicides of young people. So it's a very, very serious issue and of huge concern. But ultimately, the technology being used in these cases is not advanced technology in a sense. It's just human behavior on the internet to abuse each other. Now, of course, there may be possibilities for people to anonymize themselves so they can't be traced back, and these are challenges that we face. But yes, I mean, I think I take your point. It's a serious issue, and it's a concern to educators, to law enforcement in many countries. But I think we need to look at the source of the problem and the way that people are relating to each other as well.
Please.
Now, I will make a comment more as a citizen than as a representative of the ICT industry here. But I think that these kind of issues, as you said, should be a focus for law enforcement and for governments to discuss together what kind of tool, what kind of ways they can put in place in order to not make these things happen. I think where we need to work as an ICT industry is to improve the collaboration and the discussion with law enforcement, again in a very transparent way, as John said, because we want to avoid any misunderstanding on this from this point of view. But okay, that's a law enforcement job. Public prosecutor, we need to make sure that they understand this issue. If we have information that they don't have on the scheme, it's very important for us to give them the information. If the law enforcement, the public prosecutor, have information or needs information from us, it's very important that we make sure that we are talking with each other and we are going into a positive solution. But where, and I'm sure that from this point of view, INOP is already having discussion with law enforcement, where we need to make sure is that they know about these issues, they are thinking in finding ways in order to fight against it, and if they need support from the industry should be ready to provide this support to help law enforcement in understanding how to tackle these issues.
one last point to that. I mean, it's a very good example, and I've seen examples. For example, an organisation that the Inhert Foundation is working with in Mexico, and they have a model of co-responsibility, and they've had huge problems with, in their case, telephone extortion, but it's something that undoubtedly will move to the internet and can make comparisons with what's happening online, and they've had a huge impact upon reducing the incidences of extortion through mobile phones, through reporting and through creating hotlines, reporting lines, and actually empowering citizens to report to industry and then feed through to law enforcement. And honestly, the statistics are incredible. So there's a huge amount that can be done just by making people aware of what they can do, how they can report, and then getting the information through to the right people for investigation.
Thank you, Amy. Susie, and then the lady from World Vision at the back, and then can we have the mic, please? Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone, and thanks for the discussion from the panel. My name's Susie Hargreaves. I run the Internet Watch Foundation in the UK, and we're the UK hotline for removing criminal content, child sexual abuse content. In terms of how we're using technology to fight the issue, we're working very closely with our companies. We're funded by the internet industry. For example, we're doing a number of projects. We're doing one with Bing and with Google at the moment to block pathways to torrent sites. We're doing various other projects. We're discussing with Google having an embedded Google engineer at the IWF. So we're looking at lots of different things to work together. But the most important thing we're working on at the moment is the National Image Database in the UK. And that's a new image database which has been developed by the police, and they're working very closely with us. And the important thing is that the images that are on this database are quality assured. And we are working with them at the moment to get the images to start the database, which will go live in December. What that means is that the police, every image that goes on the database has to have what the police are calling 3 yeses for that specific grading. We're supplying the 3rd yes at the moment, which means our analysts are looking at up to 4,000 images a week each, the ones who are working on the database. The database will be hashed in total, so we will also work on it in relation to inputting into the database and taking out of the database, and we will be hashing all the images we see. And that's really important for 2 reasons. One is that we can provide the interface between law enforcement and industry, so we can work really closely with industry in a way that they can't work with law enforcement. But the second reason it's really important is we are the first hotline in the world that has the powers to proactively seek content on the internet. So actually we are actively going out there and finding much more content. We've been doing it now for 3 months, and I can't announce the results because the Prime Minister will be announcing them at an international summit in December, but already it is staggering the amount